Y'all hear that? Boy plants bushes. Thinks a row of stickers is gonna outsmart a coyote.
Duke Callahan's laugh rolled out across the feed store parking lot, big and easy, the kind of laugh that told everyone standing there it was safe to laugh too. And they did. Eli stood by the truck bed with a burlap sack of chicken wire in his arms, his ears burning red under his cap. He didn't look up. He'd learned that much already. Looking up just gave Duke Callahan a face to aim at. Hey, Thorn boy. Callahan crouched down so he was eye level, close enough that Eli could smell chewing tobacco and diesel. You know what happens to little boys who play farmer instead of doing it right. Same thing that happens to farms run by widows and 8-year-olds. He straightened up, raised his voice for the crowd gathering by the tailgate sale. They lose 'em, every single time. Somebody by the feed bin snorted. A woman near the ice cooler covered her mouth, not quite hiding the smile. Nora Whitfield came around the truck fast, her jaw set the way it got right before she said something she'd regret. Eli grabbed the hem of her coat before she could. "Don't," he whispered. Callahan tipped his hat like he was doing them a favor. "Y'all have a blessed day now." He walked off toward his truck, brand new, dealer plates still on, and didn't look back once. He didn't need to. He already knew he'd won that round. Nobody in that parking lot understood what they were actually laughing at. They thought it was a boy planting bushes. They had no idea what those bushes were about to prove. Now, to understand why an 8-year-old boy was on his knees planting thorns in November, and why that parking lot laugh was about to become the worst mistake Duke Callahan ever made, we have to go back 3 weeks, to the night Eli's grandfather's last words finally started to make sense. Because that boy wasn't playing farmer. He was protecting something nobody else in this story even knew existed yet. If you felt your stomach turn watching a grown man corner an 8-year-old in a parking lot for a laugh, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me what city, what country you're watching this from. I want to see how far this thing reaches before it's over, because the American farmer exists for exactly this moment. Stay with us, because what happens to Duke Callahan by the end of this story, I promise you, was worth every second of what you just watched. Here's what you need to know. The Whitfield place sat on 62 acres at the low end of Miller Creek, and it had been in that family for 4 generations, through droughts, through the 80s farm crisis, through everything. 2 years ago, a flash flood took Eli's mother and father in a single night, and it left Nora Whitfield, 61 years old, hands like leather, grief like a stone in her chest, raising her grandson alone. And here's the part folks in town conveniently forgot every time they laughed. Nora wasn't struggling because she was bad at farming. She was struggling because Duke Callahan had spent the last year making sure she would. He'd bought out her feed supplier. He'd leaned on the co-op to slow her equipment repairs. He'd made friendly offers to buy the land, offers that got smaller every time she said no. But here's what nobody knew yet, not even Nora. Eli's grandfather, Walt Whitfield, hadn't just left that farm behind when he died 6 months back. He'd left a location, a secret one. And on the night before he passed, weak and struggling to breathe, he'd grabbed his grandson's hand and said something that made no sense to an 8-year-old at the time. "The thorns, Eli. Where the thorns grow wild along the fence line, that's the real line. Not the one on Callahan's paper, the real one. You remember that, promise me." Eli promised. He didn't understand it, not then. And that's when everything changed, because 3 weeks ago, going through his grandfather's toolbox looking for a wrench, Eli found an old surveyor's map folded into a Bible, dated 1961, showing the original property boundary. A boundary that ran 40 yards further west than the fence line Duke Callahan's family had been quietly grazing cattle on for the last 15 years. 40 yards that included the full run of Miller Creek. Water rights. The one thing Duke Callahan needed more than anything else in this county, and the one thing he didn't legally have. Eli didn't tell his grandmother right away. He was 8. He didn't fully understand what a water right was, or what a 1961 survey could mean in a courtroom. What he understood was simpler, and it came from his grandfather's exact words. The thorns, Eli, where the thorns grow wild. So he started planting them, along the old line, exactly where the map showed it, not because he understood the legal weight of what he was doing, but because his grandfather told him to, and his grandfather had never once lied to him. He had no idea that a wild patch of hedge apple and hawthorn was about to become the most important legal marker on 62 acres. He had no idea Duke Callahan was already watching him do it. And here's where it gets worse, because Callahan didn't just laugh at the boy for sport. He laughed loud enough and often enough that it became a performance the whole town got invited to. At church the following Sunday, he made a show of it in the parking lot, asking Eli in front of 6 other families if he was building a maze for the Easter Bunny. At the county fair 2 weeks before that, he told the 4-H judges, loud enough for Eli to hear from 3 rows back, that some families in this county shouldn't be allowed near livestock unsupervised. Nobody stopped him. That's the part that should make your blood boil. The 4-H judges chuckled along. The pastor's wife looked away instead of saying something. Callahan wasn't just cruel, he was cruel with an audience, and the audience gave him permission every single time by staying quiet. Eli stopped talking about the thorns after that. He planted them before school, in the gray half-light of morning so nobody would see. He planted them after chores, alone, his hands bleeding from the hawthorn spikes, and he never told his grandmother why. She thought it was a strange, sad little grief ritual, something to do with his hands so he didn't have to feel with his heart. She let him have it. She had no idea he was drawing a legal boundary line with his bare hands. Here's where the system started working against them, exactly the way it always had. Duke Callahan didn't just have money. He had the county assessor's ear, the bank loan officer's ear, and worse than either, a seat on the water board that decided how Miller Creek's flow got allocated during drought months. When Nora fell 60 days behind on her equipment loan that November, it wasn't a coincidence that the bank called it due in full within the week. When she went to the water board to request her usual seasonal allocation, it wasn't a coincidence that the request got tabled for review for the first time in 12 years. The system wasn't broken. The system was working exactly the way Duke Callahan had spent a decade building it to work for him. And nobody at that water board meeting saw what was coming next, because at that point, not even the boy who was about to blow it wide open understood what he was holding. Now here's the part that's going to make you sick, because it's not Duke Callahan, it's family. Frank Whitfield, Walt's younger brother, Eli's own great-uncle, had been helping Nora since the funeral, coming by on Sundays, fixing what he could, telling her gently every few weeks that maybe it was time to think about an offer that lets you keep your dignity. What Nora didn't know, what nobody but Frank and Duke Callahan knew, was that Frank owed Callahan $11,000 from a truck loan gone sideways 2 years back, and Callahan had made him an offer of his own, talk his sister-in-law into selling, and the debt disappears. Frank told himself it wasn't betrayal. He told himself he was helping her see reason. But that one decision, that single, quiet decision to keep visiting on Sundays with a smile while feeding Duke Callahan every piece of information about Nora's finances, her exhaustion, her breaking point, was about to cost every single person in this story more than any of them could have imagined. Because Frank didn't know about the map yet. But he was about to find out, and when he did, he had a choice to make. Nora didn't know about the map. Not yet. What she knew was simpler and heavier. The bank wanted $11,000 in 30 days, and the water board had gone quiet on her seasonal request right when her herd needed it most. So she did the only thing a Whitfield had ever done when the walls closed in. She went to town and asked for help, legitimate help, the kind that shouldn't have been controversial at all. She requested a formal county resurvey of the property line, just a routine request. Any landowner could file one. But here's what nobody in that county office told her outright, though every one of them knew it. Duke Callahan sat on the same 3-member land use committee that approved survey funding requests. Her request didn't get denied. That would have looked bad. It got queued, which meant nothing for as long as Callahan wanted nothing to happen. Wait, because it gets worse. When Nora pressed the clerk for a timeline, the clerk quietly mentioned that Mr. Callahan had asked to be personally notified of any Whitfield paperwork that crossed the office. Not asked to review it, asked to be notified. He wasn't just blocking her, he was watching her. Nora came home from that meeting more rattled than Eli had ever seen her. She sat at the kitchen table long after dark, staring at bills she couldn't pay, and for the first time since the flood took his parents, Eli saw his grandmother look afraid. That night the temperature dropped harder than the forecast called for. First real freeze of the season, 12 degrees and dropping, wind coming down off the ridge like a blade. And that's when Frank showed up, Sunday Smile Frank, thermos of coffee in hand, with news that landed like a gut punch. Callahan, he said, had generously offered to take the water rights headache off her hands entirely with a new number. Lower than the last offer, lower than the one before that. He's not going anywhere, Nora, Frank said, gentle as ever, patting her hand across the table. Maybe it's time to let this one go, for Eli's sake. For Eli's sake. He said it right in front of the boy, like the boy wasn't the one who already knew, in his gut if not yet in his head, that something about that phrase, coming from that mouth, wasn't right. Eli didn't say anything. But that night, lying awake, he thought about the map folded in the Bible upstairs, and for the first time he understood not completely, but enough that it mattered. That it was the one thing in this whole mess Duke Callahan didn't have. But there was something more urgent happening outside, and neither Nora nor Frank were thinking about it. Because a freeze that hard, that fast, does something else in farm country. It pushes hungry animals down out of the hills looking for the easiest meal they can find. And the easiest meal in the whole county that week was about to be measured in henhouses. The next morning, 3 neighboring farms reported coyote strikes overnight. The Petersons lost 11 layers. The Grady place lost their whole flock, nearly 40 birds gone in one night, feathers scattered 50 yards into the tree line. Nora, exhausted and half frantic with worry now on 2 fronts, went out to check her own coop at first light, bracing for the worst. Every bird was alive. Not one feather disturbed, not one paw print inside the fence line. She stood there in the frost, confused, running her hand along the thorn hedge Eli had spent 3 months bleeding his fingers over, the hedge she'd let him keep as a strange grief project. And for the first time, she really looked at it. Really saw how deliberately it ran, how it didn't wander the way a child's planting would wander, but held a straight, exact line along the old fence. She didn't understand it yet, but something in her chest told her this wasn't an accident. That's when Eli told her about the map. Nora sat at the kitchen table with her father-in-law's 1961 survey spread out in front of her, hands shaking. And for one single moment, hope cracked through the exhaustion in her face. Then Frank walked in. He saw the map before Nora could fold it away, and for just a second, just 1 second, something shifted behind his eyes that Eli would remember for the rest of his life. Not surprise, recognition. Frank knew exactly what that map was, which meant Frank had known about the boundary dispute the whole time he'd been sitting at that table telling Nora to give up. Nora saw it too. The color drained out of her face as $11,000, one Sunday morning visit after another, and every single, for Eli's sake, suddenly rearranged themselves into something else entirely. Frank, her voice was very quiet. How long have you known? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He grabbed his coat off the chair back and walked out into the cold without another word, straight toward his truck, straight toward his phone, straight toward the one call he'd been avoiding making since the moment he saw that map on the table. Nobody in that kitchen said what they were all thinking. If Frank told Callahan about the map before Nora could get it in front of a judge, the last 40 years of her family's water rights would disappear into a filing cabinet permanently, and there would be nothing left to fight with at all. The clock had just started, and nobody knew how much time was actually left on it. Frank didn't make that call. He got as far as the truck, phone in hand, engine running to fight off the cold, and he sat there for 11 minutes without dialing. 11 minutes was long enough for Nora to do something Frank never expected. She called the county extension office herself, then the state land records division in the capital, then a land use attorney 2 counties over who owed Walt Whitfield a favor from decades back, the kind of favor that gets called in exactly once in a lifetime. And here's what nobody at that water board expected either. The 1961 survey wasn't just old. It was recorded, filed, public record, sitting untouched in a county archive for 65 years because nobody had ever had a reason to pull it until an 8-year-old boy's bleeding hands drew it back into the world one thorn bush at a time. The attorney read it over the phone and went quiet for a long moment. "Nora," he finally said, "if this survey is what I think it is, Duke Callahan's cattle have been grazing illegally on your land for 15 years, and that creek was never his to allocate in the first place." The county land use committee meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, the same meeting where Callahan was set to finalize the voluntary water allocation reduction he'd been quietly engineering against Nora for a full year. Same room, same folding chairs, same crowd that had laughed in that feed store parking lot 3 weeks earlier, because in a county this size, the water board meeting was where half the town showed up anyway, to hear the gossip as much as the agenda. Callahan walked in confident, the way he always did, already shaking hands, already halfway through congratulating himself before the gavel even came down. He didn't know the attorney was sitting in the second row. He didn't know Nora had filed the survey with the county clerk that morning, time-stamped, notarized, unimpeachable. He didn't know that Frank, pale, silent, sitting 3 rows back from where he usually sat, had spent 4 sleepless nights deciding which side of this he actually wanted to be on when it finally landed. When the chairman opened the floor for public comment, Nora stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Before this board finalizes anything regarding Miller Creek," she said, "I'd like the clerk to enter this into record." She placed the 1961 survey on the table in front of the committee. This shows the original, recorded property boundary of the Whitfield land. It places the full run of Miller Creek, including the section Mr. Callahan's cattle have grazed for the last 15 years, entirely inside our property line. The room went dead silent. The specific kind of silence that happens when 40 people realize, all at once, they're watching something they'll be talking about at that same feed store for the next 10 years. Callahan laughed first. Of course he did. It was the only move he had left. "That's a 65-year-old piece of paper, Nora. It's not." "It's recorded," the attorney said, standing, sliding a certified copy across to the committee chair. "Filed with the county in 1961, never superseded, never amended. Mr. Callahan's family fence line has never matched the legal boundary, which means every allocation this board has granted him off that creek for the last 15 years was granted in error, and every acre his cattle have grazed west of that original line has been trespass." Callahan's smile didn't leave his face right away. That was the worst part for him. The smile just sort of stayed there, frozen, while everything behind his eyes fell apart in real time. "This is absurd," he said, too loud now, the confidence cracking at the edges. "A little boy's bushes don't change a legal boundary." "They didn't change it," Nora said quietly. "They marked it, exactly where my husband's father surveyed it in 1961, exactly where it's always been. And that's when Frank stood up. Every head in that room turned. Nora's breath caught. "She's telling the truth," Frank said, voice unsteady but clear. "I've known about that survey for 3 weeks. Duke asked me to keep it quiet, offered to clear a debt I owed him if I could talk Nora into selling before anybody found it." He looked at Nora, not at Callahan. "I'm sorry. I should have told you the second I saw it." The room erupted, not laughter this time. Something closer to fury, and it wasn't aimed at the Whitfields anymore. Callahan stood up so fast his chair scraped back and hit the wall. "This meeting is out of order." "Sit down, Duke," the committee chair said, and for the first time in 15 years, somebody in that county actually did. The board didn't just deny his allocation request that night. They opened a formal trespass and misappropriation review into 15 years of water use. The same review that would, over the following 2 months, cost Duke Callahan his seat on the water board, a 6-figure settlement, and worse than either, for a man like him, his standing in a town that had spent a year laughing along with him. He walked out of that meeting alone. Nobody offered to shake his hand on the way out. Spring came late that year, but it came. The creek ran full and clear along the real boundary line for the first time in Eli's life, and the henhouse, still ringed in thorn hedge, thicker now, deliberately maintained, hadn't lost a single bird all winter, not even during the worst freeze the county had seen in a decade. Nora used part of the settlement to pay off the equipment loan in full and put the rest toward a new well pump they'd needed for 3 years. Frank came around most Sundays still, quieter now, doing the actual work instead of the talking, slowly earning back something he understood he had no right to expect quickly. And at the county fair that fall, the same 4-H judges who'd laughed along with Duke Callahan the year before gave Eli's flock, the healthiest, most predator-proof coop in the county, a blue ribbon and a write-up in the county paper. The boy who knew something we didn't. Eli didn't say much when they handed it to him. He just looked over at the thorn hedge, still standing exactly where his grandfather told him it should. He'd kept his promise. That right there is why we tell these stories. If this one hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to The American Farmer. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you see it coming? Because I want to know. We'll see you in the next one.